Elias Vance, a name etched into the steel heart of American railroads, stood on the platform, his gaze sweeping across the magnificent iron Serpent. The behemoth of metal and steam, ready for its cross-country journey, hummed with a latent power that mirrored the conductor's own contained intensity. Years had carved lines into Elias's face, each one a testament to countless miles of track and, more profoundly, to a tragedy that had forever altered his course. Blackwood Pass, a name whispered with dread among railroad men, was where he had lost everything: his family, his peace, and a piece of his soul. Now, his existence was a solitary dedication to the rails, a quiet penance for a past he couldn't outrun. He moved through his duties with a practiced efficiency, his actions precise, his emotions meticulously guarded, a man living purely in the present yet perpetually tethered to a haunting memory. As the final passengers boarded, a young woman with a notebook clutched tight in her hand navigated the bustling platform. This was Sarah, an aspiring journalist, her eyes alight with the promise of a story. She sought the changing pulse of America, a narrative woven into the steel tracks connecting disparate lives. The Iron Serpent, a symbol of bygone grandeur, was her chosen vessel for this quest, carrying her deeper into the heartland and, unbeknownst to her, into a narrative far more profound than she could have imagined. With a deep, resonant whistle, the train pulled away from the station, its massive wheels grinding against the tracks, slowly gaining momentum. The journey had begun. The early hours were bathed in the soft glow of a clear morning, the landscape unfolding like a painter's canvas outside the panoramic windows, rolling plains giving way to distant, hazy peaks. Everything appeared routine, yet an inexplicable unease pricked at Elias. It was a familiar sensation, a premonition that often preceded trouble, a ghost of past events that refused to be silenced. He checked his instruments, his experienced hand brushing over the polished brass, feeling the subtle vibrations that coursed through the train's frame. The weather forecast had mentioned scattered showers, nothing significant for the towering Rockies. However, a glance out of his window revealed an unsettling shift. The sky, once a brilliant blue, was now bruised with shades of deep violet and slate gray, gathering ominously over the distant mountain range. It was too fast, too sudden. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken warning. Elias's unease solidified into a cold dread as they approached Blackwood Pass, the very place that held his darkest memories. He knew its treacherous curves, its unpredictable temperament, its history of claiming souls. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the train's floor, a shudder that felt different from the usual rhythmic sway. Elias's eyes narrowed, his senses heightened. He leaned closer to the control panel, listening intently. Was it just the wind, or something more? The gentle hum of the engine seemed to falter, a momentary skip in its powerful rhythm. His hand instinctively went to the communication receiver, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a seasoned conductor like Elias, such subtle deviations were loud alarms. Suddenly, the receiver crackled to life, a burst of static overwhelming the controlled hum of the cabin. Elias leaned in, straining to hear over the sudden interference. A voice, distant and distorted, fought its way through the noise. Tracks ahead. Repeat. Tracks ahead. Severe. Blockage. Blackwood. Pass. The message dissolved back into static, leaving Elias with a chilling, incomplete warning. The words were garbled, fragmented, yet clear enough to ignite a fresh wave of terror in his heart. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The ominous sky over Blackwood Pass quickly delivered on its unspoken threat. What began as scattered showers intensified with terrifying speed, transforming the picturesque journey into a maelstrom of wind and driving rain. The train, the Iron Serpent, once a symbol of unwavering strength, now seemed to crawl through a landscape consumed by the storm's fury. Elias, gripping the controls, felt the powerful gusts buffet the train, each impact a primal roar against the metallic shell. The visibility dropped to mere feet, the world outside becoming a swirling gray blur punctuated only by the flash of lightning that briefly illuminated the jagged peaks. Then it happened. A sound like 1,000 crashing thunderbolts ripped through the air, distinct from the storm's cacophony. The train shuddered violently, throwing passengers from their seats and sending a wave of terror through the carriages. Elias fought to maintain control, his muscles straining, but the force was overwhelming. A massive rockslide unleashed by the relentless downpour had cascaded down the mountain, burying the tracks ahead in an instant. With a screech of tortured metal and a deafening crunch, the iron Serpent slammed into the newly formed barrier, its forward momentum abruptly halted. The lights flickered, died, then sputtered back to life, casting an eerie flickering glow on the stunned faces of the passengers. They were trapped, deep within the unforgiving maw of Blackwood Pass. Panic, a raw, visceral beast, erupted. Shouts and cries echoed through the carriages, mingling with the insistent wail of the wind. Elias, despite the jolt that had sent a sharp pain through his shoulder, moved with an almost automatic precision. He knew his role, knew the weight of responsibility that now rested squarely on his shoulders. "Stay calm." His voice, though strained, cut through the rising hysteria over the train's intercom. "Assess the situation. Crew to assigned posts." He disembarked, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, revealing the terrifying scale of their predicament. A wall of earth, rock, and shattered trees loomed before the locomotive, impassable and unforgiving. Initial attempts to clear the debris were futile, almost laughable in their inadequacy. The ground still trembled, and smaller rocks continued to tumble down the steep slopes, a constant, chilling reminder of the mountain's volatile power. Any thought of manual clearing was quickly abandoned, deemed too dangerous for the crew. The sheer volume of the slide was immense, far beyond what any onboard equipment could handle. From the observation car, Sarah watched, her journalist's instinct kicking in despite the fear gnawing at her. She saw Elias, a solitary figure against the monumental backdrop of the rockslide, his face grim, his movements deliberate. He wasn't just a conductor, he was a commander, his stoic resolve a stark contrast to the growing despair around him. She pulled out her small, battered notebook and began to scribble, documenting the unfolding crisis, the raw emotions, the desperate faces. This was no ordinary story. This was survival. Among the anxious faces, one stood out. Marcus, a man whose weathered features and piercing gaze spoke of a life lived on the fringes, eyed Elias with an immediate, deep-seated distrust. He was a survivalist, his pack always ready, his instincts honed by years of self-reliance. He scoffed openly at Elias's attempts to calm the passengers, muttering about city slickers and their inability to handle a real crisis. To Marcus, Elias represented a system that had failed, leaving them vulnerable. The train's limited communication systems struggled against the mountain's interference and the storm's fury. Sporadic, garbled attempts to reach the outside world yielded only static, deepening the sense of isolation. They were alone, cut off, mere specks in the vast, indifferent wilderness. The chilling reality of their predicament settled over the trapped passengers like a shroud. As Elias surveyed the colossal rockslide, his flashlight beam danced across the familiar contours of the mountain. A cold dread, far deeper than the fear for his passengers, began to seep into his bones. His breath hitched, the jagged outcropping, the peculiar cluster of pines clinging to the cliff face, the gentle curve of the track just beyond the debris. It was all too familiar. An icy hand squeezed his heart. This wasn't just any rockslide in Blackwood Pass. This was the exact spot, the very same place where years ago his family had been lost, swallowed by the mountain in a tragedy that had haunted his every waking moment. The past, it seemed, was not content to remain a memory. It had returned with a vengeance, trapping him once more in the epicenter of his deepest nightmare. The sheer familiarity of the scene struck Elias with the force of a physical blow, sending him reeling back in time. The present dissolved, replaced by a horrifying montage of the past. He saw the blinding flash of metal, the earth-shattering roar, the sickening lurch as the train derailed. His own desperate cries, echoing in the chaos as he fought through the wreckage, searching for familiar faces, for the warmth of his wife's hand, the small, trusting grip of his daughter. The acrid smell of burning fuel, the metallic tang of blood, the chilling silence that eventually settled over the destruction. It all flooded his senses, suffocating him. He saw himself, a younger man, bruised and bloodied, clawing at rocks, shouting names into the uncaring wind, his heart tearing with every unanswered call. The images flickered, intense and unbearable, leaving him gasping for air, stranded between two catastrophic moments. The emotional weight of that past tragedy pressed down on him, a crushing burden that threatened to paralyze his every move. His mind, usually sharp and decisive in a crisis, felt muddled, obscured by a fog of grief and guilt. How could he lead them out of this when he couldn't even escape the ghosts of his own past? Every decision felt tainted by the memory of failure. Every potential solution weighed against the specter of what he had lost. Sarah, ever observant, noticed the profound change in Elias. His stoic facade had cracked, revealing a raw vulnerability beneath. His eyes, usually sharp and focused, now held a distant, haunted look. She watched him, a quiet concern growing within her. There was more to this man than met the eye, a deeper story simmering beneath his weathered exterior. She sensed his distress, a palpable aura of pain that transcended the immediate danger of their situation. Her journalist's instinct, momentarily overshadowed by fear, now urged her to understand. From the back of the crowd, Marcus, his distrust of Elias fueled by the growing despair, seized the opportunity. "He's crumbling," he sneered, his voice cutting through the hushed anxiety. "Look at him. He's useless. We can't sit here waiting for him to get his head straight." He gestured wildly towards the rockslide. "We need to get out of here on our own terms. There are other ways, riskier maybe, but at least they're ways." He began to suggest increasingly desperate and, frankly, dangerous solutions, scaling the mountain, attempting to blast through the debris with improvised explosives. Each suggestion was met with a mix of fear and desperate hope from the trapped passengers, further undermining Elias's already fragile authority. As the hours dragged on, the grim reality of their predicament tightened its grip. Food and water supplies, initially thought to be ample for a short delay, were now becoming a growing concern. The limited rations were distributed sparingly, each passenger acutely aware of the dwindling resources. Whispers of hunger and thirst began to circulate, exacerbating the anxiety and fraying tempers. The confined space, the relentless storm outside, and the gnawing uncertainty created a pressure cooker of emotions. Then, a new crisis emerged. A passenger, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, began to cough uncontrollably, her breathing shallow and ragged. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue. Her husband, a frail man himself, called for help, his voice trembling with fear. The lack of medical aid, the desperate circumstances brought home the dire reality of their isolation. Elias, torn between the immediate medical emergency and the larger strategic decisions, felt the crushing weight of his responsibilities. He struggled with the moral dilemma, how to prioritize the safety of one individual against the survival of the entire group, all while battling his own emotional demons that screamed for him to simply give up. Just as a semblance of order was about to be re-established, the mountain itself seemed to rebel. A low, guttural rumble began beneath them, growing quickly into a violent tremor that shook the entire train. Loose rocks clattered down the slopes, closer this time, some striking the carriages with alarming force. Passengers screamed, clutching onto anything they could. The lights flickered again, threatening to plunge them into total darkness. This was not just another rockfall. This was a deeper, more severe convulsion of the earth, hinting at further, more catastrophic instability. The mountain, it seemed, was far from finished with them. The tremor, a violent shudder of the earth, solidified Marcus's resolve and intensified his efforts to undermine Elias's authority. He moved through the carriages like a prophet of doom, his voice a low, insistent rumble preying on the passengers' raw fear. "He's lost it," Marcus hissed, pointing subtly towards Elias, who was still trying to assess the new geological instability. "He's reliving old ghosts. We can't trust him to lead us out. We need a man of action, not a broken man." He painted vivid, terrifying pictures of them all perishing, slowly freezing or starving if they remained trapped. He proposed his dangerous plan with renewed vigor, an immediate, desperate trek out of the pass on foot, arguing that waiting was a death sentence. There was a faint trail, he claimed, a hunter's path he'd once used, that could lead them to safety, despite the raging blizzard and the unpredictable terrain. Elias, though shaken by the latest mountain convulsion, vehemently opposed the reckless scheme. He knew the Blackwood Pass intimately, its treacherous slopes, its sudden blizzards, its hidden crevasses. To venture out now would be suicidal. "The mountain will consume you," he warned, his voice strained but firm, trying to inject reason into the rising panic. "The cold alone will kill you within hours. There are no safe paths in this storm." His words, however, were drowned out by Marcus's persuasive rhetoric and the gnawing fear that had taken root in the passengers' hearts. Marcus's desperate plan, though ill-conceived, offered a tangible, immediate action, a stark contrast to Elias's plea for patience and survival within the train. Sarah, observing the escalating conflict, felt a pressing need to understand Elias's evident torment. His haunted eyes, his sudden withdrawal, the way he seemed to carry the weight of the world. It all pointed to something far deeper than just the current crisis. She began to discreetly question other crew members, piecing together fragments of Elias's past. She learned of the previous train derailment, the devastating loss of his family, the swift and brutal public blame that had fallen upon him despite investigations proving otherwise. She heard whispers of his quiet return to work, a shadow of his former self, driven by an unspoken penance. The more she uncovered, the more she understood the immense burden he carried, and the more she suspected there was a missing piece to the puzzle. A small, desperate group of passengers, swayed by Marcus's fiery conviction and their own terror, began to gather their meager belongings, preparing to follow him into the unforgiving wilderness. It led to a tense confrontation in the central carriage. Marcus, emboldened by his followers, stood defiantly before Elias. "We're leaving," he declared, his eyes narrowed. "Those who want to live will follow me." Elias stood his ground, blocking their path, his face a mask of grim determination. "You will not lead these people to their deaths," he stated, his voice low and dangerous. The air crackled with unresolved tension, a standoff between despair and duty. The dwindling resources only intensified the internal conflict. Every ration distributed, every drop of water allocated became a point of contention. The fear of scarcity fueled suspicion and resentment, turning neighbor against neighbor. The collective spirit that had initially bound them together began to fray, replaced by a desperate, every man for himself mentality. The train, once a symbol of connection, now felt like a claustrophobic cage. Elias, seeing the deep distress in Sarah's eyes, and perhaps sensing an ally in her persistent curiosity, confided partially in her. He spoke in hushed tones, revealing snippets of his trauma, the unyielding guilt, the constant replay of his family's final moments. He explained his deep-seated conviction that he should have seen it coming, that he should have prevented it. Yet he held back crucial details, the true depth of his suspicion, the lingering questions about the nature of the previous accident. He couldn't bring himself to voice the unspeakable, the seed of an idea that had festered in his mind for years. Later, while Elias was tending to Mrs. Henderson, Sarah, driven by her journalistic instinct and a growing concern for Elias, found herself drawn back to his small Spartan office on the train. Her eyes scanned the cramped space, searching for any clue, any piece of the puzzle that Elias had withheld. Behind a stack of outdated railway manuals, her fingers brushed against a loose panel. With a gentle tug, it revealed a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled amongst old diagrams and spare parts, she found it. A faded, creased photograph of a smiling woman and a young girl, both strikingly familiar, clutching a small wooden train. Beside it, a worn leather-bound journal. Her heart pounded as she carefully opened it, her gaze falling upon a hastily scrawled entry, dated just days before the first tragedy. The tracks, signs of tampering. They won't listen. It's not an accident. He wants this. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Sabotage. The word hung heavy in the air, a terrifying revelation that twisted the past into an entirely new, sinister narrative. Sarah's breath hitched, the word sabotage echoing in her mind, amplifying the weight of the faded photograph and the desperate scrawl in the journal. With the evidence clutched in her trembling hands, she sought out Elias, finding him in the dim light of the engine room, meticulously checking gauges, his face etched with exhaustion. She approached him, her voice barely a whisper, yet firm with the gravity of her discovery. "Elias," she began, holding out the photograph and the open journal. "I found these. This isn't just about an accident, is it? Your family, it was sabotage." Elias's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto the items in her hands. The usual stoicism he wore like a shield crumbled, revealing a raw vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He slowly reached for the journal, his fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. A deep sigh escaped him, laden with years of unspoken grief and guilt. "No, Sarah, it wasn't an accident," he finally admitted, his voice hoarse, the words a confession long overdue. "It was planned, deliberate, and I saw the signs. I tried to warn them, but no one listened. They dismissed me, said I was overreacting, and then it happened." He recounted the agonizing details, the suspicious track anomalies he'd reported, the dismissive responses from superiors, the gnawing feeling that something far more sinister was at play. He spoke of his lifelong quest for redemption, a silent vow to himself that he would never again fail to protect those under his charge, that he would prevent anyone else from suffering a similar fate. He believed his return to the rails, especially through Blackwood Pass, was his penance, his eternal vigil against the malevolent forces that had stolen his family. Just as Elias finished his harrowing account, a frantic shout echoed from the rear carriages. Marcus's group, driven by their leader's desperation and their own mounting panic, had indeed ventured out into the blizzard. A few minutes later, the train shuddered violently as a figure stumbled back inside, half frozen and terrified, gasping that Marcus and several others had fallen into a snowdrift, barely visible in the raging whiteout. Elias's warnings had proven tragically accurate. The unforgiving mountain had already begun to claim its victims. Without a moment's hesitation, Elias sprang into action. The weight of his confession seemed to have lifted a burden, replacing his internal turmoil with a sharp, decisive focus. He grabbed emergency lanterns, ropes, and a first aid kit. "Sarah, stay here. Keep everyone calm," he commanded, his eyes burning with renewed purpose. He rallied a few of the more able-bodied passengers, including a reluctant but now visibly shaken Marcus supporter, and led a daring rescue mission into the swirling maelstrom outside. The wind howled like a banshee and snow whipped at their faces, but Elias moved with an almost primal instinct, navigating the treacherous terrain with an expertise born of a lifetime on these mountains. He located Marcus and the others, half buried and hypothermic, their faces blue with cold. With incredible strength and precise coordination, Elias and his small team managed to pull them from the deadly snowdrift, bringing them back to the relative safety of the train. The rescue, a testament to Elias's unwavering courage and intimate knowledge of the pass, built a fragile but significant trust between him and many of the passengers. Even Marcus, humbled and shivering, met Elias's gaze with a flicker of respect, the fire of his defiance momentarily extinguished by the brutal reality of the wilderness. The immediate peril was averted, but the larger threat remained. The blizzard showed no signs of abating, and the reports from the outside world indicated that rescue efforts were still impossible, the pass completely cut off. As the fragile calm settled, a new alarming sound pierced the quiet of the train, a high-pitched whine followed by a series of unsettling clunks. Elias rushed to the engine room, his heart sinking as he saw the flickering lights and the erratic readings on the main control panel. A critical piece of equipment, vital for maintaining the train's structural integrity against the immense pressure of the snow and the shifting ground, was malfunctioning. The very steel shell that had protected them thus far was now compromised, threatening to buckle under the mountain's relentless assault. The critical malfunction of the train's structural integrity system sent a fresh wave of dread through Elias. He knew that without a functioning stabilizer, the immense weight of the snow, and the continued geological shifts could crush the carriages, or worse, send them tumbling into the chasm below. A desperate gamble was their only recourse. Elias, his mind racing, began formulating a plan, a risky, unconventional approach to not only stabilize the behemoth, but also to send a distress signal powerful enough to pierce the mountain's shroud. He needed every able body, every ounce of ingenuity aboard the Iron Serpent. He gathered the remaining passengers, his gaze sweeping over their weary, anxious faces. Marcus stood among them, still pale from his near-fatal excursion, but with a new, grudging respect in his eyes. Elias laid out his audacious scheme. They would use a combination of reinforced bracing from salvaged train parts and the train's auxiliary power to create a makeshift high-frequency antenna. It was a long shot, he admitted, but it was their only shot. "This isn't about me or you or anyone's past mistakes," Elias declared, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "This is about all of us together, getting out of this mountain alive." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as Elias began to delegate tasks. Marcus, with his survivalist instincts and practical know-how, was assigned to lead a team in reinforcing the weaker structural points of the train, using whatever scrap metal and tools they could find. Others were tasked with rigging the auxiliary power, carefully bypassing damaged circuits under Elias's precise instructions. Sarah, ever the observer, found herself in a new role, a crucial intermediary. She moved between Elias and the skeptical passengers, translating technical jargon into understandable terms, calming frayed nerves and reminding everyone of their shared goal. Her presence, her unwavering belief in Elias, helped to bridge the gap of distrust that lingered for some. As they worked, moments of profound vulnerability began to surface. A young mother, her face streaked with tears, confessed her terror for her children, and Elias, for a fleeting moment, shared a look of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the fear he too carried for the family he had lost. Marcus, while hammering a brace into place, grunted about a past mistake that cost him his livelihood, a moment of shared humanity that softened his gruff exterior. These small, fragile connections, forged in the crucible of shared adversity, began to knit the disparate group into something resembling a community. Hours bled into what felt like an eternity. Sweat mingled with the cold, and exhaustion gnawed at their resolve. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm them, a faint, almost imperceptible flicker on the makeshift communication screen sent a jolt of electricity through the carriage. A signal. It was weak, distorted, but undeniably there. A collective gasp of relief swept through the passengers. Elias, his hands shaking slightly, adjusted the old radio dial, trying to filter out the static. Through the crackle, a voice, barely discernible, began to speak. It was a message, not of immediate rescue, but a warning. The words were fragmented, laced with urgency. Saboteur, active, targeting, rescue, repeat, do not trust. Elias's blood ran cold. The saboteur, the one who had orchestrated his family's destruction, the one he had suspected for so long, was still out there, still active, and now, somehow, directly interfering with their rescue. The past was not merely echoing, it was actively reaching out, its malevolent tendrils attempting to ensnare them once more. The faint message, though distorted, carried an unmistakable, chilling implication. The person responsible for Elias's enduring nightmare was not only free, but actively working against their survival, potentially from within the very network meant to save them. The glimmer of hope so recently ignited now flickered precariously, overshadowed by the terrifying realization that their enemy was not just the mountain, but a cunning, unseen adversary. The chilling revelation solidified Elias's deepest fear. The saboteur, a specter from his past, was not merely a historical villain but a present, active threat. Before he could fully process the distorted warning, a deep, guttural groan ripped through the mountain, louder and more terrifying than anything they had experienced before. The train lurched violently, a sickening sound of twisting metal echoing through the carriages. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as the floor beneath them tilted sharply. Panic erupted anew, raw and visceral. Women screamed, children cried, and men shouted in terror as the train began to slide, inch by agonizing inch, towards the gaping maw of the chasm that lay hundreds of feet below. The mountain, battered by the incessant storm, was finally giving way. Elias, his face a mask of grim determination, sprang into action. This was it, the moment of truth. He knew with an absolute certainty that resonated deep within his bones that the saboteur's manipulation had weakened the very ground beneath them, orchestrating this final catastrophic collapse. He barked orders, his voice cutting through the cacophony of fear. "Marcus, the emergency brakes. Engage them manually. Sarah, get everyone to the rear carriages, away from the engine." His eyes scanned the chaotic scene, his mind racing, trying to calculate the trajectory, the angle of the slide, the last desperate chance. He had to make a choice, a final dangerous maneuver that risked everything but offered the only sliver of hope. The train continued its terrifying descent, the grinding of steel against rock a symphony of impending doom. Elias grabbed a heavy wrench, his gaze fixed on a critical coupling near the front of the engine, a mechanism designed to be a last resort. It was a risky, almost suicidal gamble. If he could release the front section, the lighter rear carriages might stabilize, might halt their slide into the abyss. But it meant sacrificing the engine, and potentially himself, to save the rest. Marcus, his face pale but resolute, struggled with the stiff, frozen brake levers, his muscles straining. He understood the gravity of Elias's silent command, the unspoken plea for trust. Their initial animosity had evaporated, replaced by a fierce, shared purpose. They were two men, bound by circumstance, fighting for the lives of strangers. Sarah, meanwhile, marshaled the terrified passengers, her calming voice a stark contrast to the mountain's fury. She moved with an almost journalistic detachment, documenting the unfolding horror even as she guided people to safety, understanding that this story, Elias's story, needed to be preserved. Elias braced himself, the cold metal of the wrench biting into his palm. He knew this spot, knew the mechanics of this train better than he knew himself. He had studied every rivet, every bolt, in preparation for the day he might have to face his past. And now here it was, in the flesh of this collapsing mountain, in the malicious intent of an unseen enemy. He thought of his family, their faces flashing before his eyes, and a wave of peace strangely washed over him. He was no longer running from their memory. He was fighting for it, fighting to ensure no one else suffered their fate. With a primal roar, Elias swung the wrench, striking the coupling with all his might. Metal shrieked, sparks flew, and with a deafening crack, the front carriages separated from the rest of the iron Serpent. The engine, bearing the brunt of the impact, plummeted into the chasm, a deafening echo of Elias's past tragedy. For a heart-stopping moment, the remaining carriages continued their slide. But then, with a violent, jarring shudder, they stopped. The emergency brakes, finally engaged by Marcus, locked into place, holding the rest of the train precariously on the precipice. A collective gasp of relief, quickly followed by stunned silence, filled the carriage. They were safe for now, hanging by a thread over the abyss. Elias, battered and bruised, looked out into the swirling snow. And there, on a distant, barely visible ridge silhouetted against the tumultuous sky, a solitary figure stood watching them. A chill colder than the mountain air snaked down Elias's spine. The saboteur, unmasked, revealed in the cruel, unforgiving light of the storm, a silent testament to the evil that had haunted his life for so long. The battle was far from over. The immediate danger had passed, but the chilling tableau of the saboteur on the distant ridge left an indelible mark on Elias Vance's soul. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the confrontation was inevitable. Hours later, as the first pale light of dawn tentatively pierced the retreating storm clouds, the distant drone of rotors finally reached them. Rescue teams, their powerful lights cutting through the lingering mist, descended upon Blackwood Pass. The sight brought a fresh wave of tears and shouts of joy from the weary passengers, who poured out of the stabilized carriages, their faces streaked with soot and relief. Elias watched, a silent sentinel as paramedics and rescue workers meticulously evacuated each person. Sarah, her camera clutched tightly, documented every moment, her journalistic instincts sharp even in the aftermath of such terror. She moved among the passengers, capturing their stories, their raw emotions, but her gaze often returned to Elias, understanding the profound personal battle he had just fought. Marcus, his gruff exterior softened by the shared ordeal, approached Elias, offering a nod of respect, a silent acknowledgement of the conductor's courage and leadership. The unspoken apology for his earlier distrust hung in the cold mountain air, accepted without words. Then, through the flurry of activity, Elias saw him. The saboteur. He was being led down the ridge by a small specialized team, his face a mask of cold resignation, devoid of remorse. He was an older man, his features etched with a lifetime of bitterness, his eyes meeting Elias's with a chilling recognition. The years of torment, the unanswered questions, the gaping wound in Elias's heart. It all culminated in this singular moment. No shouts, no dramatic accusations were needed. Their shared history, a dark tapestry woven with tragedy and vengeance, spoke volumes. Elias simply stared, a quiet strength emanating from him, finally free from the shadow that had plagued his existence. The saboteur, apprehended, was led away, disappearing into the growing crowd, taking with him the last vestiges of Elias's unresolved grief. The news of the miraculous rescue, coupled with Sarah's riveting article detailing Elias's heroism and the shocking revelation of the saboteur's long-standing vendetta, spread like wildfire. Sarah's words painted a vivid picture of the conductor's quiet strength, his unwavering dedication, and his ultimate triumph over personal demons and a malevolent force. The public, initially quick to judge Elias years ago, now saw him through a new lens. Sympathy and admiration poured in, shifting their perception from a man haunted by tragedy to a true hero who had defied the odds. Elias Vance was no longer just a name whispered in hushed tones. He was a symbol of resilience. For Elias, the apprehension of the saboteur brought an unprecedented sense of closure. The heavy burden he had carried for so long, the guilt that had festered in his soul, finally lifted. He felt lighter, as if a great weight had been removed from his shoulders. The solitude he had once sought as a refuge now felt less like a necessity and more like a choice. He began to see possibilities, horizons he had long considered out of reach. His purpose, once singular in its pursuit of atonement, now expanded, embracing a future where he could protect, lead, and inspire without the crushing weight of the past. The bond between Elias and Sarah deepened in the aftermath. Their conversations were often brief, punctuated by long silences filled with mutual understanding. There was no need for grand declarations. Their shared experience had forged a connection far stronger than words. Sarah, having witnessed his vulnerability and his strength, respected him profoundly. Elias, in turn, admired her tenacity and her ability to capture the truth, to give voice to the voiceless. Their relationship, born from crisis, settled into a quiet, enduring camaraderie, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for connection. Days later, Elias stood on a ridge overlooking Blackwood Pass, the sun glinting off the freshly cleared tracks. Below, the iron Serpent, battered but not broken, was being carefully prepared for transport, destined for repairs. It was a powerful metaphor for Elias himself, scarred but whole, ready to be rebuilt. The mountain pass, once a grim monument to his greatest loss, now represented something entirely different. It was a testament to survival, to courage, to the triumph of good over evil. It was a place where tragedy had been averted, where a man had faced his darkest fears and emerged victorious. Elias took a deep breath, the crisp mountain air filling his lungs. He looked out at the vast expanse of the landscape, the endless sky stretching before him. He was not just a conductor anymore, he was a man reborn. His journey of redemption was complete, and a new horizon, filled with promise and purpose, beckoned. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, ready to embrace whatever the future held.